Hello, and welcome back to Research Methodologies. In today's class, we'll be talking about project management. And with project management, this time, we more or less mean how are you going to actually get your thesis finished. So, as a general notion, if you look at the cartoon here, that is your problem. You have to write the thesis, you have to do it, it is your responsibility. We, as lecturers, will assist you, give feedback, and help you through the process. But in the end, it is your report, your piece of work, and your responsibility. So in that sense, there is more truth in this cartoon below than you probably would like to admit. So what is it that we're discussing this week? Well, basically, I'm going to talk to you about how you plan your thesis research, how to involve your managers or your thesis advisor in that, what the process actually looks like, how long it should take, why you should have organized meetings and how for your progress and how you should organize them, and most importantly, how do I give big feedback and what do I do with feedback? So these are some of the things that will all come along in this next few minutes. So if you look at a thesis, basically it is like an apprenticeship piece back from the Middle Ages. It's your proof of workmanship that you can work as a semi-independent engineer. Although we'd like to strive for perfection, we all know it won't be perfect, there will still be mistakes in it, but basically you have to prove beyond a certain level of reasonable doubt that you are capable of working as a semi-independent engineer. So with that come a few other things on the word semi-independent. It's also expected, therefore, that you can take responsibility for your own work, you have the initiative to get the work done, and that you are in control of your work and its process. That doesn't mean you don't have to listen to what everybody else around you is saying, but it does mean that you and only you are responsible for getting the work done. It also means that if you don't get your act together, you will never graduate. So to a certain extent, there is some truth in the saying that you will only graduate when you're grown up enough to sort out your own SHIT, which I'm not supposed to say on camera. So, looking at that, let's have a look at the MSc process at Aerospace. So there are basically two options. You have a standalone thesis project, which happens in rare cases, but most of you have a thesis and a literature study combined. That means that the scheduled time for this combined is 9 months, approximately 38 weeks. That is 9 months of effective working. If you put in holidays in there and Christmas falls in between, well, easily it adds up to 9.5, 10 months, etc. So it's 9 months of net work. And the general thing, what happens is you start your MSc project, in which case you pick up an assignment from a supervisor, and he talks to you a little bit about what, or she talks to you a little bit about what it is that they expect you to do. And you go away and you start sort of setting up the initial things that you would think you have to do and where you have to go, and you start looking towards a project plan, a very draft one, and you have a kick-off meeting, and in that stage basically you present your planning and roughly what you're going to do over the next 38 odd weeks. And from there you start working, so you have make yourself regular milestones. The basic idea about having milestones is that if you chop up a process of 9 months in several phases, it's much easier for you to see how much progress you're making. So you hand in your literature study, you get some feedback on that, and sort of in week 25 you have your midterm meeting, at which point you should really have more or less the body of your work ready. So I'm not talking about results, but you should be well on your way in terms of the research that you're doing and starting on having started on making the model or the experiment and all that. After the midterm meeting, where all the stakeholders are again present, you start about 2 weeks before your green light review. You submit your draft thesis to your supervisor. They then read it, and at the green light review you give a presentation of where you think everything's going, and if they're okay, then basically you start applying for your exam, and you can hand in your thesis and you can defend. That's the easy part of it. But in between there are many different sub-goals that you have to reach for yourself. When is what finished? Where do I start writing? All these things. For that you need to make a detailed planning. On exactly how to make that detailed planning, we'll come back to that next week, but for now it's important that you realize that these are some of the formal milestones that the university also keeps track of. And it also helps you to see where should I be in terms of my research and how do I avoid that I'm taking too long for certain things and when am I off track. The other thing to realize is, although these meetings are formally with your supervisor, this doesn't stop you, or in fact it is expected of you, that you also get other people involved that have knowledge that you may need to take note of. For instance, if you're going to do experiments, I would also expect you that at some point you plan in a meeting with the lab technicians in the lab that you're working with to see how do I book the lab, what do I need to do to get the experiments, is the equipment available. All these other stakeholders you also need to identify and make sure you put into your project. So, keeping a thesis project structured is for most students a big job, because it's 9 months and you think it'll be fine, but no, actually not if you're going to leave it just like that. It's really important to make a good planning chart. So use the model from the previous slide as your starting points, and also list dependencies in your planning. Where are you going to get delayed? Plan some contingency. People who put in that they're going to take 2 weeks to write their thesis make me laugh. You better hope that that's going to be the case. My advice would be is that you write up after every work package, so that altogether when you get to the last few weeks it is not such a huge work and you still know what you've done. Because if you're only going to start writing up after 8 months, the likelihood is that you have no clue what you did 8 months ago. Also, once you've made a planning, talk it through with your supervisor. Your supervisor has done this usually 100 times before and at least once before in their own thesis, and they have a better idea on how long certain activities take and whether you have a realistic view. The same goes, for instance, if you're doing experiments, that you check with the lab technicians. What have I planned? Is that work? Is that realistic? The same also, if you're going to have to use special computational facilities, are they available? All these things, you have to take that into account. Now, officially, you should have finished all your courses, but some of you have courses left over, such as this one, for instance, and it would be really wise to put them in your planning, and actually put them in your planning to finish them early. Because at the moment, you cannot graduate if not all your courses are finished. Your graduation will be postponed. And it will be very expensive and also very demotivating to have to do it that way. So make sure you get them out of the way as soon as possible. Also, don't forget into planning your mandatory holidays, your own holidays and other activities. And please realize that they don't count in the 7 months. So build also in some free time. Why? Because procrastination is good for you. What I mean with that is, it is sometimes really important to take a break from all the work you've been doing, because you've come up to it so close that sometimes you really don't know what it is that you're doing and you need perspective. So by taking a long weekend off, going to do something entirely different and come back with a refreshed mind is a good idea, and will probably also help you to get work done. To a certain extent, there's also really nothing wrong with getting up every now and then and having a good coffee break with some of your colleagues at the coffee machine or with some of the PhD students, because it's also a good way to discuss what it is that you're doing and get ideas and feedback from them in an informal way. Because the last thing you want to do is end up like this guy here, which unfortunately every year we see a few people who are just like that. The next thing to do is to realize is that this is a long project. 9 months is a long project to run. So the chances are that you won't remember what was said on day 1 of the start of this process. So it's important that you keep track. Now, how do you do this? Make sure your supervisor knows what you're doing. So have regular meetings with your supervisor. Ideally, plan them ahead. You can either plan the next meeting with your supervisor at the last meeting, but if you know that your supervisor is a very busy person, then I would suggest that you plan a standard appointment every 2 weeks, because then you know that out of these standard appointments, maybe once in every 2 weeks, one will get cancelled, but at least you'll see him every 4 weeks. And you're in the diary and it's something other people will plan around. Another important thing is when you keep track of progress is when you have a meeting with your supervisor, especially if you have multiple supervisors, for instance, if you're in industry or because there's two people supervising you, make sure you make minutes of the meetings. And yes, that is your job, not ours. And send them out. That way, everybody remembers what they agreed upon. You can ask for comments and then by a certain date, so that way you know that you've read the right thing. If you don't get comments back, then your version stands. Another good habit is to keep a logbook. And in a logbook, basically, that is like a diary that you treasure. I would really recommend you put your name and your phone number and your email address in it, so that if you leave it behind somewhere, somebody will return it to you. But in there, you log everything. So if you do experiments, most of the labs actually require you to have a logbook. But if you don't do, even if you don't do experiments, it's a very good tool to use. In there, basically, you log everything. You make your notes at every progress meetings. You make the notes on the different permutations of all the computer files of all your data that you have. All the little things that you picked up from literature that you want to examine later. Things that you've decided that are not part of your research but you would like to mention in the recommendations. It should literally be pages and pages of notes annotated with dates and who you spoke to, what it is that you did, and all the things that you need to remember. Because if you do that in a structural way, by having that logbook, at the end, when you in your write-up phase, you can go through page by page of your logbook and trace back as to what was it again that we decided there and then, or why did I do that, or in which file did I store that. It's all in there. So it's a good tool to have, and I really recommend it. Now, some of you will say, well, it's a bit old-fashioned to have a booklet. That's fine. If you want to do it in your phone, that's fine, as long as you do it and find something that is actually worthwhile to retrieve. So if you're just going to make voice notes, the problem with those is that you have to listen to all of them to retrieve them. Whereas if you just put it in one big file or one of the many note-keeping apps that you have, at least you can search through them too. Also make sure that then you have backups. That basically also goes with all your files. Make sure you have backups. For those of you who say, oh, I have so many files, they don't actually fit in my university file or at the company file box, then either ask for extra storage or ensure one way or the other that you keep your backup somewhere. Also realize that, especially if you work in a company, you might be bound by certain security regulations, in which case I would suggest that you talk to your boss about getting a backup somewhere else. There's really nothing wrong with having a backup in a different office somewhere else within the same company, so that you know you're sure. So those are some of the more practical advices when we're talking about these things. So what's important to keep in mind in all of this is, in order to make sure it doesn't become overly complicated, is to use the SMART principle. So whether when you're writing your plan, you're giving feedback, or when you're making your notes, keep this in mind. Be very specific: what, where, who, why, which. Don't write down your logbook, I need to do something with that little tidbit, because you won't know what that means, let alone anybody else will. So please be very specific. Also, in your plan, write down what it is you're doing, why it is you're doing it, how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, all these things. Also make sure everything's measurable. How much, how many, how will I know when I'm done? Make sure that you have an idea of what it is that you're going to do and when it is finished and when you're satisfied with an answer. Also look at how you're going to do, which methods you're going to employ, and what the conditions are of each measurable. So this is under the attainable. How can we accomplish it? The next thing, is it relevant? The problem with what we do is that everything we do is fun and everything we do is interesting. So it is so easy to get distracted when you're actually doing research, because you find all these side issues that are great to look at, but they are not part of your call. And if you go down every side road, you'll never be finished. So every now and then check, is this relevant? Is this what I should be doing right now? And if it's absolutely not relevant, then leave it be. But if it is relevant but not part of your plan, then write it down, because that's what number one of your recommendations then. And if you keep writing all those down, so you have a beautiful page of recommendations later on. And very importantly, timely. Can you do it in the allocated time? We are asking you to do a master's thesis, not a PhD. If you're going to plan a thesis that's going to last 2.5 years, it's going to take much, much longer even if you ever wanted to do a PhD. Because if you let 9 months go into 2.5 years, what's going to happen when you let 4 years go into what, 16? So please be very careful on how you want to do things and make decisions. And also make that part of the argument. If you're asked to do something, very often supervisors don't always know straight away how much work it's going to do. They expect you to be. So they expect you to have a quick investigation and come back to them saying, right, that's going to cost me 2 weeks. Or actually, you know, what you're asking me has all these other consequences. Did you know that? And it will take another 8 months. And then they might say, oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah, no, okay, so put that in the recommendations. That might be a nice new thesis project. Because basically, when you're having all these conversations with members of staff, it's very often also a form of a creative process where people just throw ideas up in the air, and the idea is that you write them all down, but that doesn't mean you have to do every single one of them. However, you should be able to address why you chose not to do certain ones, and that could be that it's out of scope, that it's way too much work in the time that you have been allotted to it, because trust me, any thesis is a lot of work. Because it isn't directly relevant for your work. There's all these arguments, but make sure you address them, because you know they're going to come back to you at some point and go, I thought we talked about this, why didn't you do that? And then you go, well, I did look at it, but because of this, this and this, that wasn't what we were going to do. So it's important you keep that in mind. The other thing that's really important is dealing with feedback. Feedback works both ways. You have feedback that you receive, and there is feedback that you have to give. For instance, feedback to your supervisor to say that what they proposed isn't going to work. And trust me, it's probably not a good idea to burst into an office going, you are stupid, how could you ask me to do this? This really isn't working. That is really not the way to do this. So, how do you give feedback in the form that people will actually accept your argument and accept what you have to say? So first say what goes well, or what you liked about it, then give suggestions for improvement, or explain why things don't work or how they could work and what the consequences are of the idea. So in both cases, be very specific in what you say, and what did you observe and what is the effect, and especially what is the effect on your thesis or the effect on you. So what I'm trying to say with this is, if you're going to give feedback, make sure you stay away from the accusatory things. So don't accuse people, don't go, it was a really bad idea, very judgmental. Try and make the argument speak for itself when you give feedback. And also make sure that people feel appreciated and listened to, rather than alienating them. They're much more likely to listen to you that way. So one of the guidelines that I found very useful is what do you observe, or what have you found? And what is your interpretation of, I think the consequence of doing this is, and if it's something that you don't like, or like behavior, or this consequence makes you feel like, I feel this would set me back too large in my thesis, and I would suggest that we do it differently, and for instance that. What's important is that you go through all 4 of these phases. There's nothing more frustrating for anyone in any plan, whether it's a thesis or when you're working later on in life, is to say, well, that ain't going to work, and then not have a suggestion available what is going to work. Because then you're just a person who's just always shooting stuff down. Whereas if there's another idea or another suggestion that could work, this is where you bring that to the table. So, from this, I hope you have a good idea of what is expected of you and the things that you have to do. I can't stress enough, planning is everything, and making sure you have appointments in place with your supervisors is also everything. There's a lot of students, they have a lot of PhD students, they have a lot of other responsibilities, so you're just one of the many stars on their horizon that they have to manage, and make sure that your star is nicely fixed in place for the things that you need from them. Anyways, that's it for this week. Good luck with writing your plan and receiving some feedback on it. And next week I'll talk a bit more about project planning and project management for a more systematical point of view. See you then. Bye bye.